Hi, thanks for joining. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us on all the various platforms here on the podcast, as well as on YouTube, the stuff we write on Substack, as well as quick takes on Instagram and on Threads. If you're enjoying what we're putting out there, please make sure you're sharing with all your friends and family. And if you have questions or comments about the stuff we're putting out there, please make sure you leave them in comments to us. We'd be more than happy to cover them in future talks.
It's that time of year again, that time of year where we set out to establish new goals, new understandings about what it means to be healthy, what it means to be fit, where we start to go ahead and exercise once again, to change our diet, all in an effort to somehow change our body composition, change our body weight, because we think that we have some sort of weight issue. We think that we have some sort of health issue that can be corrected by changing our diet, changing our exercise. But how can we make sure that this year is not going to be another failed attempt at making those changes that are necessary in order to have long-term success within our health, within our body composition, within our weight, where we can actually establish and make those changes, establish and make and reach those goals? How can we go about establishing the goals that are necessary so that we stop the yo-yoing, stop the start and stop, start and stop, start and stop that has plagued every year's New Year's resolution? What can we use in terms of the science that we know about how our body works so that we can establish the correct level of goals, the correct level of intensity, the correct type of dietary changes that are necessary in order to reach those long-term goals? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard or believed to be true about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy.
So a lot of the discussion here is going to seem kind of counterintuitive if we're talking about a New Year's resolution that is surrounding weight and weight loss, particularly when we start looking at the goals and the way in which we establish the pattern of workout, the pattern of dietary changes. Because the idea that everybody has about this weight loss goal or this weight loss resolution or this body composition resolution is that it's about the scale. It's about what my body weight actually is. And while we may establish a goal that says, oh, we want to be a specific weight, we want to have this specific type of body composition, we want to look this specific way, we end up establishing a set of negative reinforcers. And that negative reinforcer is what is actually being detrimental to that long-term success that we have. And so when we start looking at this idea about how can I go about establishing my goals, how can I go about establishing my New Year's resolution so that it's sustainable. Not only is it sustainable, but it's something that is realistic, it's something that is actually achievable. This is where we start looking at what are the goals that we're establishing, and why is it important to establish the goals in this pattern so that we do not have this fallback, so we do not have this loss of momentum that we might get when we first start doing this journey within this New Year's resolution about achieving a weight loss. It's something that once again, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's what usually is causing people to become yo-yoers. It's something that we resolved within a study that we published back in 2018 on a group of individuals within a single family, because we wanted to eliminate some of the confounding variables when we start looking at changes in body composition, changes in health, changes in overfatness issues that come about because of other things that are outside of the control. Where we took a group of individuals that were all first cousins that all suffered from yo-yoing, where they would start and stop their own health journey, their own weight loss journey. And one of the things that we started doing within this is something that came from some of the meta-analytical studies that we published and some of the other research that we looked at in terms of this overfatness epidemic that everybody likes to think about in terms of obesity and metabolic diseases. But there's a whole other avenue that we've talked about as it relates to those issues. And we said, okay, what is it that's causing the yo-yoing to come into play? What is it that's causing the start and stop to come into play? And it all revolved around the scale. What is my actual body weight? And so when we start looking at this idea about how do we go about establishing goals, how do we go about establishing a pattern of reinforcers that will allow us to have a continuous progression, allow us to have this long-term view of body weight changes, body compositional changes, but more importantly, look at it in terms of a fitness aspect. And this is where I've had discussions with siblings, I've had discussions with family members, I've had discussions with colleagues, I've had discussions with just friends about this. If I am able to change one aspect of my behavior towards being pro-health, other aspects of my behavior will also change. And so if we start establishing our goals based off of a negative reinforcer, which is the scale, and the reason we call it a negative reinforcer is because if I don't see the change that I want to see, I get discouraged. And we don't want to establish discouragement here. What we want is we want to establish goals. We want to establish metrics that can be measured, that can be tracked, that can be that we will able to see the changes in over time based off of things that will constantly give me a positive reinforcement within the feedback loops that are going to allow me to have continuous use of whatever intervention I'm doing, whatever change in pro-health behavior I happen to have. It's very similar to what we look at in terms of all other avenues of lifestyle interventions, where we look at other things that are going to encourage the continuation of those lifestyle interventions, whether it's giving up alcohol, giving up smoking, or giving up gambling, or any of the other kind of quote unquote anonymous groups that are out there. There's Overeater Anonymous. There's all these other anonymous groups that are out there that provide that social encouragement to continue the progression, even if there happens to be setbacks. But we don't get that with the scale. The scale is this thing where it's like, I have this mindset that I'm going to somehow drop 30 pounds, somehow drop 40 pounds, somehow drop 50 pounds. But I don't do it in a realistic viewpoint. I don't do it with this understanding of how long does it actually take to have these changes? What happens to my metabolism? What happens to my physiology as I start to modify my diet, as I start to modify my exercise? And this is where one of the things that we did within that group of yo-yoers is that we took back the scale. We eliminated the scale from this metric of change that we were looking at. As the researchers, we still looked at the scale. We still had weigh-ins. We still had we used that as a means to establish things like basal metabolic rate, establish nutrient loads, establish caloric balance issues, without using that as the end-all be-all for what changes took place. What we did is we did performance. We looked at what types of changes do we see in the performance metrics of the individuals. And this is where we start looking at those goals. And when we start looking at those goals, we start establishing those SMART goals, the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, with a time measurement style goal. Stuff we talked about in the past, stuff we've talked about a lot as relates to how can I make sure that I am seeing the progress I need to see. But we also went into this and we said, okay, how long does it take for me to realistically see body compositional changes? How long is it realistically going to take for me to stop seeing body compositional changes? When am I going to start seeing hormonal adaptations start to wane, to start to slow down? When am I going to start seeing responses and adaptations stop based off of the changes that I'm doing within my exercise, changes I'm doing within my diet? And this is where we get into this discussion where, you have to always work to failure in terms of resistance training. You always have to be some sort of progressive overload without understanding the time scale of what is taking place within these training mechanisms. Or where you always have to be in some sort of caloric deficit, some sort of negative caloric balance without understanding what the caloric balance means, or how we can go about establishing nutrient deficits without actually dealing with this caloric balance issue, which can have differential responses that we see. But once again, it goes back to that time scale and the fact that we tend to ignore the time scale that will allow for changes in body composition, changes in performance, changes in physiological regulation, changes in adaptations within the tissues, all based off of the various platforms that we see these responses taking place, physiologically taking place, hormonally taking place in terms of the feedback regulations that we see within the body. when we start looking at this idea, one of the things we have to start looking at is, okay, how far out should I start establishing my goals? How far out should I look at being a loss of, say, 10 pounds, a loss of 15 pounds, a loss of 20 pounds? When should I start seeing a plateau take place? And it goes back to the idea that we've talked about a lot in terms of this periodization model of exercise, periodization model of diet, where changes in diet, changes in exercise, changes in lifestyle have to be some sort of constant wax wane on off, where I am doing one adaptation to something. Once the body stops adapting, then I have to somehow make a different change. I have to somehow make some sort of different responses to the stresses that are occurring, so that I have this constant sense of a little bit of stress. And that constant sense of a little bit of stress is something that's going to allow me to have continuous progressive changes. It's not about continuous overload. It's not about always training to failure. That is kind of all over the place within our social media fitness experts. That's not the idea that we're looking at here. The idea that we're looking at is that it takes between 4 and 8 weeks for every person within the population, every person that's out here listening to this podcast, or everybody that you know. It takes 4 to 8 weeks before we start seeing actual changes. Particularly if I have been doing stuff for some period of time. If it's brand new to me, I'm going to get a novel response. And that novel response is something where the body's going to have a quick adaptation to it. So if all of a sudden today I stop eating, say, sugar, we go complete keto, I'm going to start seeing rapid changes over the first few weeks here as my body starts to figure out, how can I get the fuels that I need in order to maintain my energetic levels, in order to get the ATP back that I need in order to do the work I'm doing? And it's those rapid changes that we think, oh, this is going to be an easy thing. I'm going to see this continuous progression. I'm going to keep losing all this body fat because I'm doing keto. And because I'm doing keto, I'm cutting out the carbs, I'm cutting out the sugar that everybody talks as being bad, even though as we pointed out previously, we need sugars in order to maintain certain types of tissues, particularly for athletes, particularly for students, particularly for young people. We need sugars. But we're following this keto, and this keto is causing me to very rapidly lose body fat. And I'm very rapidly losing body fat because the body, my cells, my tissues, we're seeing changes in hormonal signals that is allowing me to increase the amount of lipids, the amount of fats that I'm using for my energy, where I'm getting changes in various types of tissues in terms of the energetic pathways. That's going to make me become more of a quote unquote fat burner than I was previously. But very quickly, the body starts to adapt. And if I do not make other changes to my diet, if I don't make other changes to my lifestyle, I'm going to start seeing this very rapid change go away. I'm going to reach a plateau. And it's that plateau effect that tends to get people to be discouraged. And these plateaus will occur at that 4 to 8 week window, where I'm going to see changes and see changes and see changes. And if I don't make other adaptations, if I don't make other changes to what I'm doing in the gym, what I'm doing in my diet, what I'm doing in other parts of my lifestyle, I'm going to stop seeing the changes. I'm going to stop seeing the changes at the rate that I'm seeing it. It doesn't mean that changes won't occur. It's just the rate at which the changes are going to take place start to drop. And this window is between 8 and 12 weeks. And so we set up this New Year's resolution that, okay, I'm going to go to the gym. And this is where everybody says, oh, you want to avoid the gym on January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, because everybody is setting up this New Year's resolution of going to the gym. If I'm someone that's never gone to the gym before, I'm going to start seeing very rapid changes in that first couple of weeks. But after that first couple of weeks, I'm going to start to see plateauing taking place, particularly if I don't make any changes to my behavior, especially if I don't make any changes to other aspects of what's going on, whether it's progression in my exercise regimen, whether it's changes in intensity, whether it's doing some sort of periodization, or it's other things that take place. By the end of January, I'm going to start seeing a plateau take place. And then come February, I'm going to stop seeing much change, and I'm going to start getting discouraged. And then come March, I'm done. I'm done because I stopped seeing the changes. And I stopped seeing the changes because I've now reached that plateau point. But if instead of looking at this in terms of, I'm going to very rapidly lose weight and I'm going to maintain that very rapid weight loss, and I'm going to continue this very rapid weight loss for the entire year until I finally reach my goal of losing 60 pounds. If I ignore that as the avenue of metric, that avenue of tracking, and instead track, how do my clothes fit? How is my subjective energy level? Do I feel tired more often? Do I feel more energetic more often? How easy was that weight that I was moving in the gym? How long can I run without getting quote unquote winded? All of those various factors are going to be the things that we actually want to track, not the weight itself. The metrics of fitness is what we want to measure. The metrics of fitness. How much change have I seen in the weights that I'm moving? How much change have I seen in my resting heart rate? How much change have I seen in my ability to do endurance training for longer periods of time? And this is where we get into this idea about setting training goals. And my training goals are going to be dictated based off of what do I want to accomplish from training within that 8-week window of time. And it's always in that 8-week window of time. What I want to do is I want to break up. I want to establish my micro goals, my meso goals, and my macro goals. My weekly goals, my daily goals, my monthly goals, and then my yearly goals. Within that, if I'm someone who's just starting off, if I'm someone that has done a lot of yo-yoing within my regular life, where I gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, where I start a diet, I stop a diet, I start a diet, I stop a diet, where I'm constantly having this pathway where I'm always going to be having some sort of swing in my body weight. And that swing in my body weight is going to become a discouragement for me. What I want to do is, instead of looking at that body weight, I want to look at what are the metrics of change that I'm able to see, that I'm able to realize when I'm looking at the weights I'm moving, when I'm looking at the distance that I'm able to cover on a run. This is where we set those fitness goals, and we set those fitness goals at that point where we know, based off of everybody in the population, we're going to see plateauing take place. And that plateauing is going to allow me to make changes. So we're brand new. My first goal for the entirety of everything is to establish a pattern. And that establishment of pattern needs to have some sort of social reinforcement to it, which means I can't say, okay, I'm going to go walk around the block by myself. I have to have somebody there with me. I have to have some sort of external thing to check and make sure that I'm doing what I'm setting out to do. Or if I don't do it, I know I'm going to get the encouragement to do it, not the discouragement of you didn't do it. This is where you set up time with your friend to go to the gym. This is where you set up time with your neighbor to go for walks around the block. This is where you establish that pattern. This is where those tracking devices come into play that are very good in terms of that social encouragement to continue with what we need to do so that we're able to continue our progress within the avenues of fitness. This is also where we can start to establish other changes necessary during those first few weeks, where we're not going to go gung-ho on our dietary changes. We're not going to say, okay, I'm going to cut out all sugar, all carbohydrates from my diet. This is where we're going to cut back on sugar, cut back on carbohydrates in the diet, but increase fiber, increase other aspects of that carbohydrate or that sugar or that fruit or that vegetable within the diet that we should be eating, so that we're able to make sure that we're maintaining our nutrient loads. And this is where we go back and we start saying, okay, how much protein should I have? How much carbohydrate should I have? How much fat should I have? Based off of what my body mass happens to be. Not based off of a caloric balance, not based off of a BMR, but based off of what my nutrient load happens to be. And this is where we start to ignore a lot of the talking points that are coming out from a lot of the various quote unquote health experts that we hear about on social media, that somehow have platforms out there that talk about empty calories and and junk foods and things like that, things that sound kind of scary, things that sound kind of correct, but actually are meaningless throwaway phrases. A lot of people will talk about these empty calories, but then they'll talk about your diet and your nutrition simply off the calories. And so if it's simply off the calories, there's no way that I can have empty calories. The idea about empty calories is where the person who is talking about anything about calories in the diet is actually talking about nutrient load and nutrient densities. And this is where we want to make sure that the small changes that I'm going to make is, okay, I'm going to, instead of going out for food, I'm going to learn how to cook my food. Instead of eating prepackaged meals, I'm going to make my own meal, where I'm going to increase the amount of fruit I have in my diet. We're going to increase the amount of vegetables I have in my diet, as opposed to eating the prepared snacks that have the carbohydrates that we need. We're getting it from things that have additional nutrients within them, where we're getting the fiber, where we're getting the vitamins, where we're getting the minerals that we see within the plants, within the vegetables that we need to eat, so that we're able to make sure that we're not just meeting our macronutrient goals, but we're meeting our micronutrient goals. And so we have these first few weeks of goals established. And it's all about establishing those patterns. By establishing those patterns, we're going to start to see changes within our body composition. But we have to kind of take a step back and not use the scale still. What we want to do is we want to say, am I going to the gym every day? Am I increasing my level of physical activity every day? Have I been able to cut back on the processed foods that I don't want to eat anymore? Am I eating more whole foods? Am I eating more vegetables? Am I eating more fruits? Am I switching from eating one type of food to eating a different type of food based off of the understanding of my food choices? Once again, it's not about having good food and bad food. It's about having the correct choices within the food choices that we need to make. And we continue this for the next couple of weeks. Once again, we're simply establishing the patterns. So my first week goals is all about pattern recognition and establishing the pattern that's necessary so that I'm able to maintain what I need to maintain for long periods of time. That leads into my meso goal, my 1 month goal. My 1 month goal is going to be based off of some sort of performance. What do I want to have as a performance change over the first month? If that performance changes, I want to be stronger, then I'm going to set up my meso goal, that 1 month goal, to be, I'm going to increase my bench press by 15%. And I can actually track that. If I start off at 100 pounds, 15% of 100 pounds means that I should be bench pressing 115 pounds. If I'm someone who has never done bench pressing before, I've never done lifting before, if I've never done exercise before, that's going to be a very attainable goal. It's going to be an attainable goal that I will probably exceed in that first month, simply because of the way in which the SAID principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands, occurs within the muscles. That's going to allow me to have a change in the way in which my brain recruits the muscles to do the lift, where I'm going to get much stronger, faster, then I'm going to get bigger. And so I have this 1 month goal of, okay, I'm going to have this 15% increase in my strength, but also a secondary increase of aerobic fitness, where I'm going to say my distance covered in 12 minutes, doing a 12-minute walk or a 12-minute run test, the Cooper's test, I'm going to increase that distance by 10%. Once again, if I am able to, in that 12 minutes, cover 1 mile, now I need to cover 1.1 miles. Once again, 10%. It's a realistic goal. It has that timeline to it. It's attainable. It's not something that is so far out in terms of a realistic set point that I know that it's something that I cannot attain. So we now have our micro goals of establishing the pattern. We now have our meso goal of some sort of change in performance. I now move forward into month 2. Once again, we have our pattern established. And so now the next set of goals that we have is going to be focused on changes in performance. And those changes in performance is going to lead to changes in progression in weight, changes in intensity of aerobic or endurance exercise. But it's also going to have secondary components to it, particularly social components to it, where I'm going to try different exercise modes. I'm going to figure out what do I want to do for long periods of time, because I need to have something that I'm going to self-select and self-monitor beyond just that 1 month period of time, where I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to try different types of group exercise classes. I'm going to go and I'm going to try different types of weightlifting routines, where we're going to establish different types of patterns within that next month, where I'm going to figure out what type of endurance exercise do I want to do? Am I someone that wants to run? Am I someone that wants to walk? Am I someone that likes to swim, likes to bike, would rather go and do the Zumba and the step aerobic classes, or the kickboxing classes, or the spin classes? What types of endurance stuff do I prefer to do? But then I'm also going to look at, how am I able to progress with my weight training? Am I still stuck on machines, or have I started to lift with barbells and dumbbells? This is where we start looking at that progression coming into play. As we move into that next mesocycle, we've established our pattern of behavior. We've established the exercise modes that we like to do. It is now about establishing progression in the exercise routine, and progression exercise routine that is geared for a specific goal in mind. Not just a percent change, but something that is more specific. Something where it's like, I'm going to be able to run a 5K without having to walk during that 5K. Where everything within the training pattern is going to be geared towards increasing strength, increasing endurance, increasing power, increasing cardiorespiratory endurance, increasing local muscle endurance. All of those factors are going to come into play so that I'm able to get to that. I'm going to be able to run that 5K within 1 month, within 2 months, where I have that mesocycle spaced out so that it is something that is attainable, and something that is attainable based off of the physiological responses that are necessary in order for me to be able to have the adaptations necessary to get to that spot. Now, within this progression, one of the things we have to start looking at is if we're looking at differences and differential responses that we're going to see based off of changes in our dietary components, but not just changes in our dietary components, but changes in how my body might respond to the changes in dietary restrictions or changes in dietary intake based off of biological factors, which include things like sex, where we understand based off of hormonal regulations, biological females have a slightly different response to dietary changes than biological males. And it's all about various responses to hormones. And it's those responses to hormones that's going to have impacts on if I'm going to follow, say, an intermittent fasting style diet, where I'm going to have days of restriction followed by days of normal eating. And it's those changes in fasting and changes in feeding that cause a hormonal difference, where we do not see the same responses for the female, the biological female, that we do for the biological male. And that's all about hormonal shifts in the way in which the hormones are going to be regulating various types of metabolic outputs. And so if we're going to start looking at making these large-scale dietary changes, we have to understand, how do the hormones come into play as we start looking at the changes that we want to establish dietarily. And within that, one of the things we have to recognize is that for women, following an intermittent fasting is going to have a wholly different effect to it than what we see with males, where females tend to have a drastic shift in metabolism that is a downward trend in metabolism, that is where actual basal metabolic rate actually starts to drop with fasting, even intermittent fasting, whereas with males, it tends to elevate. And most of that has to deal with hormonal responses in the androgen side of steroid hormones, followed by changes in growth hormone responses that we see and the sensitivity to various types of growth hormones that is different between a biological female and a biological male. And so we start seeing these hormonal shifts, these hormonal swings that are going to take place based off of how we do the diet. So if I'm going to start making huge dietary changes, I have to understand that there's going to be a biological difference that can impact how I'm going to respond to that specific diet. Where if I'm going to follow this intermittent fasting pattern, I have to understand that I'm going to have issues in terms of having this kind of quote unquote rebound effect coming out of the fasting into the feeding cycle within this intermittent fasting. If I'm female, which is going to actually have a worse, but quotes around that, effect on my metabolism relative to the male. And so if you are doing your social interactions and you have a cross-sex group, you can't follow the same dietary restrictions because you're going to have different responses within that. And this is where we come into discussion about ideas of doing periodization within the diet to match the periodization you're doing within the training, where you're going to have changes within energetic demands, you can have changes within nutrient demands. And those changes in energetic demands, changes in nutrient demands should be matched with changes that you have within your diet so that you have this constant progression that's taking place. And so we have this understanding in terms of the science of how does the body respond to having nutrient restrictions, particularly excessive nutrient restrictions on the fasting side, where it's wholly different for the biological female than it is for the biological male. And we have to understand that, which means that if I happen to be female, I cannot follow the same dietary restrictions that my male partner is going to follow because we're going to have different responses. And that different response it may be actually negative in my health outcome, in my fitness outcome in the long term. And that's the key here. We're looking at the long term. We don't think of 12 months as being long term, but 12 months for the way in which the body adapts is long term. And so when we start looking at this idea about long term and long term adaptations and this microcycle, mesocycle, macrocycle within there, one of the things we have to make sure that we're trying to avoid within establishing our goals, establishing our resolutions, particularly if the resolution is about body weight, is to avoid the get fit quick scams. Avoid the just take this pill, you're going to lose your body weight. Take this drug, you're going to lose this amount of fat. Take this quote unquote fat burner, it's going to eliminate body fat. While there is some evidence to support the use of the GLP-1 agonists, the GLP-1 drugs, it is not an end-all, be-all for body weight changes, particularly once you come off of those drugs. Yes, you can have greater weight loss with the GLP-1 agonist relative to not using the GLP-1 agonist while on those drugs. The rebound weight gain following the termination of the drugs is greater than what we see from the group that was in the control groups for all of the studies that are related to this GLP-1 drug. And that's because people will take the drugs and will think that since I'm taking the drug, I don't have to make the same level of lifestyle changes that I had to make if I wasn't taking the drug. One of the things that is coming into play, particularly with a lot of the social support networks that are out there that relate to the weight loss issues, the Nooms, the Weight Watchers, the His, the Hers, all of these compounding pharmacies that are selling the GLP-1 drugs, a lot of the HMOs that are using the GLP-1 drugs as part of an anti-obesity medication. A lot of them are also starting to introduce the changes in lifestyle necessary and the support network necessary to encourage the continuation of those weight loss changes, even after termination of the drugs, or where they are doing it where they're cycling the drugs in such a way so they can continue to have a loss of weight beyond just the short-term gains. And so we start looking at this idea about the GLP-1 drugs and all of the other drugs that are out there, whether they're dietary supplements or actual prescription drugs that are there. All of them are being used as a means to supplement what is already being done in terms of changes physiologically that we see from people who are doing diet, doing exercise. One of the things that we have shown in our meta-analytical study comparing the thermogenic dietary supplements, the quote-unquote fat burner supplements, and those that just did diet and exercise, the thermogenic substances, the substances that are supposed to be quote-unquote fat burners, actually have a lower efficacy than simply doing diet and exercise. They are worse than doing just diet and exercise in terms of getting body compositional changes. Plus, almost all of them have some sort of adverse effect cardiovascularly in terms of changes in blood pressure, changes in heart rate, that increase the likelihood of having cardiovascular disease develop. But because of the way in which the laws are set up as it relates to those drugs, they are unregulated, which means that those adverse effects are not indicated, even though we see it within studies that look at those dietary supplements. If we start looking at the GLP-1 drugs in terms of what we get from there, there are a host of adverse effects that we talked about in terms of our discussion on peptides, in terms of the discussion we had specifically about GLP-1 agonists that can have catastrophic effects on my overall health as it relates to both gastrointestinal motility, that is how well my digestive system does digestion and absorption, but also in terms of regulation of metabolism at other areas of the body. The GLP-1 drugs were never developed for weight loss and weight loss only. They were developed for helping diabetics control blood glucose levels. And so we have to remember that. So we have to avoid those get fit quick schemes. We have to avoid being reliant upon the drugs when the drugs are being offered to us. And we have to avoid requesting the drugs if we do not fall within the categories of people who should be getting those drugs. And that's the other thing that we have to understand is that, yes, drugs are being advertised on television, on all of our streaming services, so that you can somehow, quote unquote, lose 20% of your body weight, which is not a guarantee. Nor is it something that for most people you want to actually have, because you're going to lose not just the fat that you want to lose, but you're going to lose other tissues, because you cannot lose a specific tissue without it having it surgically removed. And so we have to take that into consideration. But the biggest thing we have to start thinking about, start worrying about, is how we actually talk about the foods that we're eating, how we actually talk about the changes that we're looking at, not just for myself, but in the others that are within my social group, where we talk about, oh, I can't believe you're eating that, you just ate something, or I can't believe you're eating that, I'm still full from previous meal. I can't believe you're doing that. Don't you know it's bad for you? Put quotes around that. And a lot of those negative feelings, those negative sentiments get carried out into how we feel about interactions with food, interactions with diet, interactions with exercise, and can cause psychological anxiety, can cause psychological distortion about what my body image happens to be, what my body weight happens to be. It can create negative connotations within myself about my diet, about my exercise, particularly in and around specific cultural events. And this is where we have to be especially careful if we're making these changes to my diet, changes to my exercise, if we happen to have children in and around the group that we're in my family, in my friend network. We have to be very careful about how we present choices as relates to diet, as relates to exercise, as relates to food. with children, because the children will pick up very quickly any type of negative connotation that we happen to have. And that negative connotation can lead to long-term aversions to specific things, where they'll start patterning themselves off of their role models. And if they see us as a role model, they're going to pattern themselves off of how we do things. This is where we have to make sure that we do not create negative viewpoints about specific things, where we talk about choices in food, not foods as a choice, where we talk about making good choices in our food as opposed to having good foods and bad foods, where we start making decisions about having a good choice in being physically active, not having this type of exercise be good, that type of exercise be bad, where we have this kind of need to establish a holistic viewpoint as relates to diet, as relates to exercise, as relates to being a pro-health advocate within our own social network, where we have to remember that we are establishing a mindset to be pro-health. That mindset to be pro-health is not about being restrictive. It's not about being contrarian to something being good, something being bad. It's about establishing the incentives necessary to have increased pro-health attitudes, increased pro-health lifestyle that is going to be supported, not just by myself, but by everybody within the social group, where we establish short-term goals that will lead to my intermediate goals, that will lead to my long-term goals, that is going to provide a continuum of responses that's going to allow me to have a stepping stone approach between the shortest term of changes I want to see, that I'm going to establish my new pattern of behavior, to that longest term, I'm going to be able to lose so much weight, where I'm going to have a change in body composition that's going to allow me to maintain my body mass, but recomposition my body mass, where I'm going to cut my body fat and increase my fat-free mass, increase my lean body mass. All of these ideas have to be presented in such a way that they are pro-health in their attitude, where we're not using the scale, where we're not reinforcing any behavior based off of what my body weight happens to be, where we're looking at the performance that we have as the goals that we're setting out for ourselves, where we're using fitness metrics, where we're using health metrics, not scalar metrics, not what is the body weight, not what is my body composition, but using metrics like what is my resting heart rate, what is my strength, what is my endurance, where we have to get out of the mindset about body composition, about body weight being the indication of health, the indication of fitness. One of the things that we have noted in a recent study that will hopefully be out in publication very soon is that there is an implicit bias towards body weight, towards body image, to the projection of what we expect body weight to be in terms of health based off of what a person looks like. And this implicit bias is seen in healthcare providers, it's seen in educators, it's seen throughout the population, where that implicit bias blinds us to being open to other avenues of metrics for fitness. And we wanted to establish this New Year's resolution, not based off of this bias blindness, not based off of, okay, I have to have this specific type of body weight, I have to have this specific type of body composition in order to be healthy. I want to be healthy by having a lower heart rate. I want to be healthy by having higher amounts of strength, by having greater amounts of power, by having greater amounts of endurance, not based off of being at 10% body fat, not being at 120 pounds, not being at some sort of arbitrary measure of body weight, arbitrary measure of body mass index, arbitrary measure of body composition. I want to be healthy. I don't want to have a body that looks healthy. And that's how we have to establish these goals, particularly if we're looking at establishing these goals to have long-term benefits for myself, allow me to achieve the changes that I need to achieve to be able to reach my New Year's resolution. If my New Year's resolution happens to be a weight loss thing, happens to be something where I'm no longer going to be a yo-yoer, where I'm going to find something that I like to do and I'm going to continue to do it, which takes me back to the story that we started off with. That those people that we took through our long-term 2-year study, that study was done from 2016 to 2018. We're now starting 2026. All participants in that study have maintained their body mass and have increased their use of exercise and have not yo-yoed. All because we were able to establish a periodized program that allowed them to find what they wanted to do within their exercise regimen, provided the correct positive reinforcers to allow them to continue to do exercise, to continue to have correct dietary changes. We did not have excessively restrictive dietary modifications where the dietary modifications fit their specific type of dietary guidelines based off of what their family history happens to be. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully, get out of the conversations relates to setting the goals and establishing the patterns that are necessary to reach New Year's resolutions and understanding how the science, the way in which the body works, the physiology of our body is going to impact how we can go about reaching those goals, how we need to utilize the periodized approach in order to stepwise get from point A to point B in our journey towards fitness, where we do not want to fall into the traps of the misinformation, disinformation that's out there as it relates to the get fit quick schemes that bombard us on a daily basis within our social media feeds. If you have questions or comments, please leave it. We're more than happy to discuss it either here on the podcast, in YouTube videos, on the written stuff in Substack, or even in the quick takes that we post to Instagram and to Threads. If you have questions or comments, please leave it for us. We're more than happy to discuss it. Please follow us here on the podcast as well as subscribe to YouTube. Follow us with the written stuff in Substack as well as the quick takes we post to Instagram, Threads, and now on Blue Sky. Please stay tuned for future discussions as it relates to the misconceptions that we have about how the human body works, as well as how we can go about living a healthier lifestyle.